Ping produces and sells its products through 3 separate divisions, and there are 2 service departments which carry out admin and service functions. The first service department is the IT. Now, the IT service department is funded internally and provides services for the 3 other divisions. Doesn't do anything else. Each of the 3 divisions is given a budget allocation, which it uses then to buy the IT. So there's a management budget given to each of the 3 departments, and they then allocate part of that budget to the IT department. The IT department is directly accountable to the division heads for this expenditure. So it's an internal market. Yeah? So that's the way the IT department works. HR is the other department. Payroll, staff development, training, HR, human resources. Now, this department earns 80% of its revenues from selling its time and expertise to outside organisations. And these external revenues that it earns represent a total of 15% of the overall activities of the company. The performance of the second service department and the 3 separate divisions is regularly reviewed by the chief operating decision maker. In addition to the heads of division, there is a head of HR. The head of HR is an important person because the head of HR is directly accountable to the chief operating decision maker. And they discuss the activities, the allocation of resources, and the financial results of the HR department. I will do an answer, but I think it'll be an overview answer. We'll start with the definition. Yeah, segmental report. Yeah, what a segment is, and perhaps a mention of the materiality. Then we'll start to apply. What do you think about the IT department? Is the IT department a separate segment, yes or no? Does the IT have business activities? Not really. Is the IT's results regularly reviewed by the chief operating decision maker? No. So the IT department fails. HR? Yeah, HR does, doesn't it? HR is a segment. Its results are regularly reviewed by the chief operating decision maker. 15% is significant because it's material. It is therefore material. So, it's about structure. Yeah, it's about structure. So I'm just going to put together a very brief answer plan. I'm not going to write out the whole thing. Eight marks. Maybe, just maybe, 2 marks for a definition, 3 marks for the first one, 3 marks for the second one, something like that, maybe. So we could define a segment. A segment is a component of the business that engages in a business activity whose results are regularly reviewed by the chief operating decision maker and whose information is available. So it engages in business activities and results are reviewed by the chief operating decision maker. materiality. You've got a 10% threshold on your revenue, on your costs, and on your assets. Ideally, you don't want any more than 10. You can combine similar departments. IT department. The IT department is accountable to the division heads. The IT department is accountable to the division heads. The IT department has no revenue, no business activities, is not reviewed by the chief operating decision maker. So it's not a segment. But everything about the HR screams segment. Everything about the HR screams segment. Yeah? It meets the 10%. Its performance is reviewed by the chief operating decision maker. So it would qualify as a segment. Segmental reporting. Advise Ping on how it should deal with these things, and Ping, yeah, the IT department is not a segment, but the HR department is a segment. That's basically the conclusion you're coming to. In the exam, what you should try and do is think about the number of marks available and plan your answer accordingly. So we've defined a segment, a couple of marks, talked about the IT, talked about the HR, come to various conclusions. In the exam, don't use dashes. In the exam, try and write short, sharp, simple sentences as you've seen me do. I'm one of 6 children, so I have 5 siblings. I have an older brother, I have 3 older sisters, and I have a younger sister too. So I'm not the oldest, I'm not the youngest, I'm not the oldest son, I'm just kind of in the middle. So my parents were fairly relaxed about the way they brought us up, didn't burden too many expectations on us. Anyway, whatever. But I do know there is a part of my father whom is still alive, and I love him dearly, and this is not meant to be a criticism of him, but I do know there's a part of my father which is a little bit disappointed in me. My father taught me to drive, and my father's a very clever man. He was a doctor, he was an engineer, he did a number of things, and the way that his brain works is he always has to understand how everything works. So when he was teaching me to drive, he used to service the car. And he started telling me, there was I, learning to drive, he was telling me how the carburettor worked. Yeah? And how the fuel injection and how the choke. And do you know what? I don't care how those things work. I just want to be able to put it in gear and to move around. I don't really understand how computers work. How the internet, it seems magic to me. But that doesn't matter. Yeah? Google and Uber, they work for me perfectly well. How they actually make it happen, I don't know. Now, my father, who is 85, he hates the internet because he doesn't quite understand it. My mum, bless her, she's on Facebook, she's all over the place. And she just does it, you know, and she doesn't really understand it, but that doesn't stop her. My father has a different mentality. So, when I was being taught to drive by my father, I know I upset him. I've had this conversation with him, because I still don't really understand chokes and fuel injections and diesel and petrol, and it's just an engine to me. As an accountant, if somebody buys a car in the business, it doesn't matter what type of car it is. If somebody buys a Rolls Royce, or somebody buys a lorry, or somebody buys a tractor, or somebody buys a Ford car, the accounting for that car is the same whether it's a Rolls Royce or whether it's a tractor. The car has been purchased for use within the business. As an accountant, I'm interested in knowing what the cost is, what the useful life is, and why we bought the asset. So I am not involved in deciding what type of car we are buying. That's not my job. That's the job of the car buyer. When we talk about derivatives, we're going to talk about options, swaps, futures, forward contracts. We could have a very interesting lecture on the difference between a forward contract and a futures contract. We could have a very interesting lecture about options, whether they're European options or American options. But I don't give a damn, because I'm teaching you P2, not P4. So when we talk about buying a car, we just say it's PPE. Doesn't matter what type of car it is. When we talk about options, swaps, futures, derivatives, when we talk about options, swaps, futures, they're just all derivatives. The expert will decide exactly what sort of contract we've entered into, and the expert will decide exactly what sort of car we buy. So there's a little bit of information in the notes, but it's kind of background. And you do not need to be afraid, you do not need to be worried about all these different sexy types of financial instruments, because they go and make your head hurt if you look at it too much. They are just called derivatives. So, when we talk about accounting for derivatives, we are talking about, effectively, forward contracts. we are talking about future contracts. We are talking about swaps. We're talking about options. You could also even be talking about swaptions, because you can swap an option. Anyway, let's not go there. If you want to do P4, respect, do P4, but only do P4 if you love F9. You really have to love F9 to do P4. And some of you will, and that's fine. A forward contract or a future contract seems to imply that we're entering into a contract to do something in the future. So maybe today I'm sitting here in Malaysia and my functional currency is the ringgit, but I know that I know that in the future I'm going to have to buy some Singapore dollars, because maybe I've got to pay a supplier who is in Singapore and they have supplied me with some goods on 90 days credit. So I know that in 90 days' time I am going to have to pay that supplier in Singapore dollars. If I wanted to, I could just relax, and just buy the Singapore dollars in 90 days' time. If I was a little bit more uptight, if I was a little bit more risk adverse, I could enter into a contract today to buy the Singapore dollars in 90 days' time. Now, if I enter into a contract today to buy the dollars in 90 days' time, that contract is a derivative, because that contract is entered into at little or no cost. That contract is entered into at little or no cost. It is designed to be settled at a future date. Now, as the exchange rate with the Malaysian ringgit and Singapore dollar begins to move, so technically speaking, my contract will begin to have a value. My contract will begin to have a value. So we have a definition. Did I upset her? We have a definition of a derivative. So it's always good to start with definition. A definition of a derivative is that it is a financial instrument whose value is derived from the price of an underlying item. A contract to buy and sell Singapore dollars depends upon the exchange rate. A contract to buy or sell oil depends on oil prices. A contract to swap interest rates depends upon interest rate movements. A contract to buy and sell shares will depend upon the share price. So the value is derived from the price of an underlying item. It has entered into at little or no cost. It is entered into at little or no cost, and is designed to be settled at a future date. It is designed to be settled at a future date. It is designed to be settled at a future date. It is designed to be settled at a future date. Right, let's have a look.